Hey everyone, Eric here, and we're going to do something in today's video that I haven't done in a really long time, and that is like read an article pretty much in its entirety. And the reason why is this is about Star Wars, it's about the Acolyte, it's about the fandom that we all exist in here on the internet, social media, all these different various places. And I thought it was quite interesting. I read through the article, I was like, I want to make a video about this, particularly because I enjoyed the Acolyte, even though it wasn't a perfect show. I had a lot of fun watching it, and there were moments that could be discussed in nuance about the issues. We've talked about it in great detail, but this over ambitious, toxic community that just cannot let people have something that they enjoy because they don't like it, because that community doesn't like it. This doubling down, tripling down on going after people and harassing people who are enjoying something that they don't enjoy it should be studied. And with the Rolling Stone article here that we're going to be talking about as a commentary piece from C.T. Jones, they kind of dive into it a little bit. And I think it's interesting to see like larger media outlets starting to notice how ridiculous this trend is. And I understand why it exists. We talked about it, but I'll talk about it here in this video as well. In terms of like why people go for this kind of engagement, kind of why it's out there and as prevalent as it is. So sit back. We're going to go through this entire article, but I do want to point out, if you are a fan of the Acolyte, and I never do this, but if you're a fan of the Acolyte, there is a change.org petition for Renew the Acolyte, which to my surprise, and I say to my surprise because change.org stuff doesn't typically do well, but they're trying to get 50,000 signatures. And as of right now, recording this video on the 26th, they're at 46, almost 47,000 signatures. So I will link this in the description box if you want to go over and sign it. I'm not saying it's going to bring the show back, but if you want to show a little bit of solidarity with the community that's pushing back against some of this toxicity, it's there for you. I think that's quite interesting because they were saying that like no one's watching the show, but now there's all kinds of cope arguments about why the change.org petition is doing well. Look, I don't believe that these petitions do anything incredibly like I don't think they're breaking any boundaries or making people change their minds necessarily, but I think it is important to show the studios that if you're going to try and do something bold and diverse and different, that you need to stand behind that thing and really give it an opportunity to put its best foot forward. And I don't necessarily feel like they did that with the Acolyte, but we'll get into that as we get through this article. So the title of this article is, Can the Best of Star Wars Survive the Worst of Its Fans? And I think that is a great title. Before Star Wars can have another successful show, some vocal parts of the fandom have to reckon with what they really want out of the franchise. And I think that's a really interesting take on this. I think I've touched on it a bit, but I've never really, jumped into it like they do in this article. So let's go through this, grab yourself a drink, something to snack on, and let's have a chat about this. When George Lucas debuted his science fiction epic about a galaxy far, far away in 1977, Star Wars went from a long-shot space opera into the highest-grossing science fiction franchise of all time. Almost 50 years and one sale to entertainment conglomerate Disney later, Star Wars isn't just a one-off world. There have been prequels, reboots, standalone television series, and an in-depth theme park edition. But like most popular culture, the Star Wars fandom, especially online, has become inundated with loud, conservative, and in some cases incredibly racist voices. And I think that's really important to point out, that it isn't like the entire fandom. We talk about like toxic fan bases. We've talked about Marvel. We've talked about DC. I think it's important to remember that the loudest portion of the community isn't always the one that's representative of the entirety of the community. And a lot of times their loudness is to make up for their lack of mobility, for the lack of size. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're talking about any of these, because you could apply this to almost any fandom, any large fandoms right now on the internet. While Disney has never said these voices are directly impacting what shows get made, the vocal minority of Star Wars devotees keep limiting what they'll accept as true Star Wars. These fans say they are fighting for Star Wars' future, but if their endless fantasy world can't accept any story that they don't recognize, some of the self-professed biggest fans in all the worlds could be closing themselves off to any future at all. And this makes me think of like Skeleton Crew, right? So Skeleton Crew seems to be showing a different side of the world that is Star Wars. And that is a world that isn't part of necessarily fighting back, the rebellion, the resistance. It isn't part of like any of the Sith stuff or whatever, at least from what I can tell in the trailer. It seems like an adventure story with characters that exist in a world that is, or a show that is in the world of Star Wars that isn't all about everything we've seen in Star Wars, except for maybe the space elements and of course the nods to the Star Wars universe. But it's not about, at least from what I can tell, about the Jedi or the Sith or the Mandalorian or anything like that. It's like what would the people in this world look like that aren't part of those things? And certainly they would live in neighborhoods and buildings and things like that. Not everybody is doing what we see as the more epic space battles or things like that's something that only a unique set of characters get an opportunity to experience. But it seems like they don't want to see that. It's almost like a peek behind the curtain for them, where some people are like, I want to know more about this world, but they don't seem to care about that because for them it's about pew pew pew, laser swords, magic. Like they don't want these like fully fleshed out stories that they keep asking for, because if they did, they would want more content to layer into the Star Wars universe. But that's not what's happening here. What is crystal kyber clear is that before Star Wars can have another successful show, the loudest voices online need to realize that the Star Wars that they want to return never existed in the first place. Will the real Star Wars please stand up? It's an interesting statement. The loudest voices online need to realize the Star Wars they want to return never existed in the first place. It's a pretty bold statement. Much of the online discourse around Star Wars is centered on the franchise's most recent live-action projects, first premiering in 2019. These include The Mandalorian, which I know people talk about that, but that one doesn't get as much hate as some of the other ones. The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, and The Acolyte. The market has been oversaturated with stories, especially many that occur within the same time frames, with fans frankly getting tired and in some cases outright bored. I've talked about this. There is a conversation to have about overuse of certain locations, certain time periods. Tatooine, for example. How many stories are going to happen on Tatooine? You expect to see it, but also, do you want to be there for an entire episode? You know what I mean? Like, how much is too much? And that's more of a personal take on it, I guess. Each of the projects have had their own reception and own problems. However, the low audience scores, angry YouTube rants, and long Reddit threads can really, really boil down to one question: who determines what's real Star Wars? And it's the people that are making it, really, right? I mean, yeah, the fandom can decide what they want to engage in, but it's the people creating it that decide what is quote unquote real Star Wars. Which I think that's what makes a lot of people mad, is that they don't have control over what happens with this. They can't just scream and holler and have the studio do whatever they want them to do, which is why this whole Acolyte thing is so weird, because is that what's happening? Is the studios just like giving in to all of this? First as a film, then as a trilogy, Star Wars established early on to viewers that even when they were focused on a set of powerful twins and a dark empire, shit was going down on literally every other planet. Exactly. This freedom has allowed for endless story arcs across decades, but while opportunities have been endless, the patience of fan hasn't. Says here, take for example the most recent series, The Acolyte. Created by Leslie Headland, the series follows May and Osha Anasia, a pair of mysterious twins who baffle a group of Jedi. When May fails to follow through on her education with Sith Master Kamir, Osha takes her place. The series is one of the first of its kind, a Star Wars edition that explores both the backstory of the Sith and a potential for corruption where the Jedi, the moral pillars, aren't in the right. Now, they have touched on this in other properties, but yes, this show actually gives us more of a nuanced explanation for why it could happen, which I saw a lot of real Star Wars fans complaining about it. But well before the show premiered, vocal online fans mocked Steinberg's casting, calling the series evident that Disney was capitulating to a woke crowd by having multiple, oh my gosh, people of color in the cast. Oh no, not multiple people of color in the cast. How dare they? They also criticized news that the show would include queer characters, including a coven of witches, which, by the way, I know I'm going to get some pushback on this, but that was like the most surface level queer representation they could have done. They really could have done a lot more. They could have pushed it a lot harder, and they didn't. And even I said this on a podcast where we were talking about the show, I felt like it was almost a non-thing. Like the idea that these women, these witches were raising these children as a coven almost takes away from the fact that the parents were two women, especially when it was a magical birth. So it really didn't, in my opinion, fully realize what queer characters could be in Star Wars, because we never really got enough of it. There was a little bit there, but they never really pushed it. So I know they complained about the queer representation in the show. I think the show didn't go as far as it could have, to be completely honest. This week, Deadline reported that Disney canceled the series after just one season. Fans upset with what they called a social justice warrior direction for Star Wars celebrated, calling the show disrespectful to the original films and simply not the Star Wars they loved. Twitter owner, Elon Musk even celebrated the news of the show's cancellation, appearing to tweet, call it X and then say tweet, it's post, appearing to repost a redacted version of the phrase, go woke, go broke, which, like, just say it. Like, I don't understand. Disney has not released a statement on why the Acolyte was canceled, and the representatives for Disney and Lucasfilm did not respond to Rolling Stone's request for comment. Reception for the series was mixed, though, with people praising performances from Jacinto Steinberg and Lee Jung-jae, but criticizing the story's overloaded plot and short episode count. Yeah, again, there were issues with the show. However, it's all too easy to imagine how a show with an already expensive budget, over $100 million according to Deadline, might be easier to scrap entirely rather than contend with the potential of another lackluster and ill-received season. Which, again, they haven't given a reason why. There's been speculation, but even at the time of recording this video, I looked it up. I haven't seen any statements, and if Rolling Stone would have had one, this article would have been updated. But another aspect can't be divorced from the modern fandom is almost consistent racism and sexism that leads of color receive when they are cast in Star Wars related projects. Steinberg said that after a casting, she was bombarded with racist harassment, and she was. There was tons of it. You can even see it on the Instagram. Go look at the Instagram post on her page. It's been very painful to me. It's not something that I think you can emotionally prepare for. We welcome criticism of the show when it comes to storytelling or performance. Absolutely 100%. I agree with that. But when it comes to death threats, horrific, racist, violent language, it's unacceptable to me. And I know a lot of those folks would want to pretend that that's not actually happening, but it is. And even if it's just one person, it's too much. People shouldn't be doing that. Kenobi star Moses Ingram has also said people threatened her life when she joined the Star Wars project. There's nothing anybody can do about it. There's nothing anybody can do to stop the hate. I question my purpose in even being here in front of you saying that this is happening. The same thing happened to Kelly Marie Tran when she was cast in Last Jedi. If someone doesn't understand me or my experience, it shouldn't be my place to have to internalize their misogyny or racism or all of the above. I agree with that. Again, 100%. And you could criticize Reva as a character, but that wasn't the only thing that was happening. And I think people that are critical, like, for example, if you're critical of Reva as a character, you should denounce racism. You shouldn't pretend that it's not happening. You shouldn't go, Reva was bad because I didn't like her storyline, but all this stuff about it's not just racism, it's not just sexism, that's not the problem. No, you shouldn't. That shouldn't be your response. Your response to that should be all of that, and then you go, but I denounce any racism or sexism she might be experiencing because of this, because that has nothing to do with the complaints I have about the character. But that's not what happens, because is it cognitive dissonance? I don't know. I have no idea. It says, and John Boyega received so much harassment and racism when he was cast as the lead in Star Wars The Force Awakens that he claimed Disney executives sidelined him in further films to appease with outspoken white fans, which is weird because the people that were on board with all of that back when it happened are now turning around and saying that they loved his character, trying to do revisionist history when that's not at all what was happening. I remember the stuff about how can a stormtrooper be a black guy? That was like the discourse that was going on when that was when that film was coming out. Disney not responded to this claim at the time, but has since been more outspoken through the official Star Wars social media pages when new cast members receive death threats. They have. The backlash of racism, sexism, and online abuse seems consistent across all Star Wars projects, most heavily targeted at leads of color. But when online pundits criticize Star Wars for taking a woke direction, they ignore the power that exists in the source material to begin with. Lucas himself has pointed out that his intentional choices in making powerful and high-ranking women integral to the success of each film. Who do you think the heroes are in these stories? What do you think Princess Leia was? She's the head of the rebellion. She's the one that's taking this young kid who doesn't know anything about this boisterous, I know everything guy who can't do anything and trying to save the rebellion with these clowns. Lucas said in May at the Cannes Film Festival. And it's the same thing with Queen Amidala. He's also pushed back on the idea that his world was created for just white men. Most of the people are aliens. The idea is you're supposed to accept people for what they are, whether they're big and furry or whether they're green and whatever. The idea that all people are equal. So he's saying here that the entire concept of Star Wars as a universe is this world where what matters is the character of the people, like who they are at the core, the actions they take, the things they do, the stories they're involved in, not necessarily if they're men, women, Wookiees, whoever they might be, whatever they might look like, whoever they might be involved with. These are all things that are layers onto what the core of the story is, which is we're telling a story about a galaxy far, far away. And that totally makes sense to me. But what it seems like extreme fans don't realize, they're creating a space where even the truest of Star Wars fans still wouldn't want to participate. Let's be real. If you thought you could make the next great Star Wars iteration, but you knew that your project would be lambasted simply for casting a person of color, is that where you would invest your time? That's a really good point. Or if you were an actor of color choosing between the two roles you believed in, would you pick one that came with an almost guaranteed hate campaign? The Star Wars fans clamoring for a return to the originals aren't just talking nonsense. They're ruining their chances to see a franchise they love grow in any meaningful way. And again, this is how that toxic community will get what they want out of some of these projects. Is some women, some people of color, some queer people just don't want to deal with the social backlash from the really hateful part of the community. So they're just going to pass on these things. And then what will happen is that these roles will be changed or the movies or projects will be canceled. And then you end up with some bullshit. Star Wars is about a galaxy filled with endless choices, battles, and people trying to make a difference. The fans who are the loudest at the moment aren't just willfully ignoring Lucas's original vision. They're making their own world smaller in the process. And I think it was important to read through this whole commentary piece, simply because a lot of it that's talked about, I mean, almost every single bit of that is important to go over. And so I wanted to just put this out there for you guys and sort of give my commentary on it and how I've enjoyed engaging in all of the shows, even the ones that I didn't like, that I wouldn't necessarily tune back in for. I still enjoyed them taking a shot at it, like the Book of Boba Fett. When I watched that, it wasn't for me. I thought there was some good stuff in it. Wasn't for me, but I wasn't campaigning to get the show canceled. And I certainly wasn't going around and harassing people that are fans of the Book of Boba Fett, right? That wasn't my move. But I wanted to talk briefly before we wrap this up about why this happens and why it's such an issue. So when you're doing social media, there's the way people get funding or they make money is primarily like three different ways. One of them is from direct donations from fans. It's like if you're over here, you're getting super chats or you're getting tipped on another outlet. You have fans that are directly either paying for your content through shout outs with super chats, or they're buying memberships to your service, to your site through Patreon, through memberships here on YouTube or whatever. That's one of the things. The other way that you would get it is through some sort of sponsorship, which is companies coming along and saying, hey, you give us a shout out in your video, you get this much money, blah, blah, blah. It's different for everybody, but there are sponsorships there. Those are two of the ways that we are probably the most familiar with. And if you'll notice, a lot of people in the toxic fandom don't necessarily get sponsorships. Their money is primarily through direct funding from their viewers, from people that are watching, which incentivizes them to continue to do the kind of stuff they're doing. And then the third way is ad revenue. Ad revenue is through engagement, through social media clicks, through watch throughs, things like that. And a lot of these ad companies that pay for ads on like Twitter or YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, wherever, they want to see that engagement. They want to see that click-through rate on the content. And as long as the guys are getting paid enough directly through their fans to make the kind of content they're making, they're going to keep doing it and they're going to keep pushing it out, which is going to create a pipeline that's going to funnel that content ahead in search features. And so you'll see more and more of that. You'll see more and more copycats of that. And thus it trains the ad revenue system to recognize that content is getting click-through rates. So it's this weird cycle that they're in. That's why this stuff happens. And the channels that do it may not necessarily be going all out racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever. They might not be doing those things. But what happens is the fans of those channels tend to like spread out into other places. I've had it happen over here on my channel where I've seen people come over from those pockets of the internet and start harassing people in my comment section. So it does happen. And this is why it exists in the first place. And until we can address that portion of it, we're never going to fix the toxicity that exists. So we need to be more proactive in making people aware of that kind of content and what that kind of content brings to the table, and why people get engaged in it in the first place. And it is sometimes as simple as people just don't like gay people. They don't like women. They don't like people of color. It is that simple. But sometimes it's about watching that specific type of content and getting wrapped up in that to the point where you feel like you're a part of that community. You may not hold those values, but you sort of go along with it because you're just okay with it. You've heard it so much that it doesn't even matter to you anymore, and you don't see a problem with it. Anyway, let me know what you thought about this in the comments down below, and can't wait to hear everybody's feedback. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.